Oh my God. I posted a video last night and it just went viral. And everybody gasped. How do I feel? I don't know how to feel. This is so sad, bro. He's like, please, I can't breathe. I can't breathe. And they did not care. They killed this man. And I was right there. I was like 5 feet away. It's so horrifying.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Health Wrap. Darnella Frazier is not a household name, but she has come to be known as the 17-year-old girl that actually videotaped the murder of George Floyd. And because of that, she shared with you the pain, the trauma that was not only ignited in her, but in millions of people across the world. I love the way actor Will Smith put it, Carla. He said, racism isn't getting worse, it's getting filmed.
In fact, Carolyn, some people are calling her the filmmaker of the year. Basically, she's actually the filmmaker of the century, because there is no way anyone would believe that horrific incident unless she had filmed it. We want to thank her for her courage and for all of, she says there, she was traumatized. And that's one of the things we're going to talk about today. Is racism a public health threat because of all the trauma? Not just this, what we're seeing right now, but this is something that has been going on for decades, for hundreds of years. And if it had not been for Darnella to cast her eye into the eyes of Americans to see what's going on and the hurt and the pain and the disbelief, no one would believe it unless they had seen it.
So you talk about the public health crisis, and it was interesting. Earlier this week, I posed the question on Facebook in a poll, and I asked people, do you believe that racism is a public health crisis? And let me just tell you, overwhelmingly, people said, absolutely, yes, we had almost 200 people that responded to the poll, and we appreciate the response. And Norquita Edmonds said it's the #1 cause of PTSD in communities of color. Levi Johnson said it's a mental health crisis in our country, which makes it a public health crisis. And Charles Fleming said it's a people problem. And then Jacob White said, without a doubt. We've got a similar poll that we're going to ask our viewers. We want to know what you think. If you're watching us this afternoon, we want to know what you think about whether or not it is a public health crisis. We asked you to please take our poll on Facebook. Answer yes, no, maybe. Never really thought about it. Carla?
Yeah, do you think racism is a public health crisis? And we're going to get some help with this. And we actually do want you, as Carolyn said, to take our poll. But we're going to bring on, this is Doctors on Call with the Health Wrap, and we're going to bring on a doctor. And Dr. Layla Bonner from Belmont is a family therapist. And in her practice, part of her practice and what she teaches also at Belmont University is something about race issues and race matters. Thank you so much for joining us.
Welcome.
I guess the first thing we just want to ask you right out the gate, can you explain how racism is a public health threat?
Yes, so racism actually is a preponderance of research that talks about the negative outcomes of racism on health, on mental health. In particular, you can develop PTSD, anxiety, depression. Part of what some people might experience are flashbacks and intrusive thoughts of events like this, insomnia. Now, in terms of physical health, there are a number of negative outcomes as well. Racism actually changes some of the structures in your brain and the functions of your brain. So you may experience some cognitive impairment. You makes we experience elevated cortisol levels, which of course puts us at risk for stroke, cardiovascular disease, premature death. So racism, in fact, is a public health issue. There's so many particular physical, poor physical health outcomes that are associated with racism.
I know, Carolyn, we always talk about health disparity. And Dr. Bonner, one of the health disparities is heart disease.
Yes,
And I know it's a great number one killer for African American women,
that's right.
especially. And can you talk about the stresses that brings on of racism? Kind of give us a line of issues that happen, and then how that leads to heart disease, and what can we do about it?
Sure. So, and one thing I forgot to mention in the era of COVID-19, racism is related to immunosuppression. So we need healthy immune systems, but racism and discrimination suppress our immune systems. So what typically happens is when we as Black people walk through every day, we're often we battle microaggressions on a daily basis, right? So these aren't just overt instances of discrimination, but these are the subtleties that happen every single day. And what happens is we end up being in a constant state of arousal, and your brain and body can't stay in a place of constant arousal all of the time. And so that elevation can lead to cardiovascular disease.
So, Dr. Bonner, what can people do? I mean, I woke up this morning and I was listening on another station, and they had someone on who was talking about breathing. And I actually said, let me try it. And I've tried 3 different ways to breathe. But seriously, what can we do? Because at our age, you sometimes begin to realize you've learned to live with this for a long time. But what can we do to stay healthy?
Deep breathing is very important. In fact, when clinicians work with individuals who've experienced trauma, deep breathing is one of the first tools we teach them because it regulates the central nervous system. And so when we get into fight, flight, or freeze, we need something to be able to calm us down. So deep breathing is something that everybody can do right now. The second thing is emotional regulation. We need to be able to talk about what our feelings are, right? And in our community, sometimes we engage in emotional numbing. We're not able to talk about our feelings are, but we as clinicians encourage people to express your emotions, label them, because that's very helpful in terms of emotional regulation.
What happens if you don't? My brother and I were talking about this, as professionals, a lot of times people think, oh, you're a Black professional, you don't have to deal with everything else that people may be economically challenged. That's not the truth. And a lot of times Black professionals especially just try to hide it. They don't want anybody to know in the office about what they're experiencing. And in fact, there are some companies now that are saying to their Black colleagues, we want to help you all. Can you talk a little about that?
Oh my gosh, I can personally talk about that. I mean, I teach students and talk about race all the time. And I tell them, I stand here in front of you, and yet I'm triggered at times. I've been triggered this entire week, and I've still been talking to students about what they can do, how they can help their clients of color work through their particular issues. So in a sense, we've learned to develop our own coping skills, and we have to vacillate between white spaces and Black spaces. And that's sort of an adaptive coping mechanism that we've all developed. So professionals are not immune to it.
Absolutely. I was encouraged this week when one of my high school classmates, Kim Lewis, actually formed a humanity forum where she included her coworkers and her neighbors and her friends and relatives, and just brought everybody together to talk about how they felt and any questions that they might have. And I get the questions on Facebook. We got a lot of folks watching and weighing in now. We thank you for watching. Again, we want to encourage you to take the polls. If you have a question for Dr. Bonner, we would entertain that as well. Just let us know. Again, this information we think is so critical because while we started this endeavor as the result of COVID-19, the reality is that health disparities has been out there for some time, and it will continue to be out there for some time.
It will. Carolyn, I want to speak to what you just said, that your friends get together and they talk about things. The research talks about developing counter spaces. When I talk to Black students that PWIs, predominantly white institutions. I tell them of the importance of going to where the community is. Go to these counter spaces with other Black people where you can talk about the emotions that you feel, and you don't have to code switch, and you don't have to over explain your experience. People just have an understanding that there's healing in community, and that's what you're talking about.
Dr. Bronner, I also wanted to ask you about this. We talk about culturally competent therapists, but in a multicultural world that we're living in now, and you're teaching all kinds of students, multicultural students, what are you teaching students who are not of color? I know you told them to go talk to people, but how are they going to take that step? Because some of them are like, I don't know what to say. What can we say to people? What do you need to do to take that step?
The number one thing I tell my students who are not Black is to examine their own privilege, examine their own implicit biases and their blind spots. And when it comes to working with people of color, I also say, develop relationships. It's important for my students to be able to know Black people and be in relationship with Black people in their personal lives, so that they don't get into a counseling session and they are consumed with fear about saying the wrong thing.
Well, Dr. Bonner, this has been great. We see that Benita Walker is watching. We welcome you, Ms. Walker. And she said, just learning to live with it exacerbates the problem. And she's right, I guess. If you're just learning to live with it, it's not enough.
Yeah, and we have to learn mechanisms to actually deal with microaggressions or racism when it actually confronts us personally.
Okay, I see you got a whole fan club, Dr. Bonner. You're following me. We thank you, though, for taking time to be with us and to remind us why this is so important. The connection between racism and the health crises, and then the health crises putting us in a more vulnerable position as we're trying to battle a pandemic. Because yes, y'all, it's still going on. It is still going on. But thank you for being with us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Carla, I tell you, it's there's so many connecting dots, and it's so important that people are taking care of themselves. And we're still talking testing because this is still a pandemic, and we're going to have more on testing when we come back. But first, we want to welcome our new sponsor to our show. We'd like to welcome the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. And they scored. They have Coach Dawn Staley with a special message. Coach?
This is Dawn Staley, head coach of the University of South Carolina women's basketball team. In the fight against COVID-19, we all have an important role to play. Let's stop COVID-19 and spread caring. And remember to stay careful and stay connected. Visit DHEC's website for more ways to stay South Carolina strong.
Welcome back to the health wrap. I saw you, Carla. I got you covered up. Gotta back each other up. People only knew. I mean, did you know when we went to journalism's college, which seems like ages ago, we would actually be broadcasting from the sunroom.
Yes, one day people keep saying we want to see behind the scenes. One day we're going to show you all behind the scenes because you won't believe it.
Well, we're so thankful though. What you get from having a great colleague like Carla is she could pick up the phone and pull in a Dr. Bonner, and I could pick up the phone and call a few friends in South Carolina. One we have joining us now is Dr. James Coleman, and I'm so happy to have Dr. Coleman. I've known him for a long time. Hey, guys, how you doing?
Good afternoon, everyone.
Good afternoon. We invited Dr. Coleman on because he is part of a central piece of testing, which is what people are doing in order to fight COVID-19. Tell us what you're doing in Mississippi.
In Mississippi, I'm the CEO of G.A. Carmichael Family Health Center, which is a federally qualified community health center that provides primary health care services to underserved populations. In Mississippi, we are conducting the COVID testing mainly because we want people to know. The old adage says knowledge is power. And the reason I use that adage around this is because, first of all, we need to know. Second of all, we need to know to isolate. And we need to know to isolate so that we can stop the spread. People are sometimes not aware that in isolation and stopping the spread, we're protecting our families. I had someone ask me the question, well, why should I take the test? I'm going to get better. I will get well. That is true. You can recover. You will recover. But we need to think about our elderly family members. We need to think about our youth. We need to think about people within our household that may not know that they have the virus. And if we get tested, we then can isolate ourselves to stop the spread.
Absolutely.
And then,
describe for us what it looks like, because we have community health centers that are all over the country, and I know a lot of them are engaged in this process. How have you all set this up?
we've set it up. We have a mobile medical unit that we have set up on the outside of the health center, and we do the testing, we do the temperature checks before all the other patients come in for service. If your temperature is high, if you're experiencing symptoms, if you just showed up to get tested, we will direct you to the mobile medical van. And what we have done thus far, we have tested about 2,376 persons within our 3-county area. And out of that, we found 239 positives, which is about the threshold of the 10%. And one encouraging note about that is that the testing between males and females is almost equal. We often hear that women go to the doctor more. I'm very encouraged that our males are coming out to get tested so that they'll know. But one of the problems that we see, about 45% of that 239 positives are females. So that is a concern for us because usually, that's the caretaker in the home, moms with babies. So we definitely need people to come out and get tested so that they can isolate themselves.
Dr. Coleman, can you talk a little about some people that are older people remember the whole Tuskegee experiment, and we want them to know this is not like the Tuskegee experiment.
This is definitely not like the Tuskegee experiment. What we are doing is taking the swab and doing a nasal swab and also a swab of the throat. There's no injection. There's nothing going in the body except the swab. What that swab would then do is be sent to a lab. The lab will turn it around within 48 hour protocol. It says 48 to 72 hours. And we ask that people will isolate themselves during that time period until they get the test back. But this is nowhere like Tuskegee. I would say the concern would be for some persons when a vaccine is discovered, then those fears probably need to be addressed. But until that time, testing is testing. There is nothing being injected into the body.
I'm real intrigued about your experience of having more males that are coming. What do you attribute that to? Did you all do something special along the lines of outreach?
I'm going to give you my theory. A lot of in our communities there, we have a lot of factories. Nissan is in Canton, Mississippi. There is also Wrangler and Lee. We have a lot of factories, and some of the factories that are there are requiring that their employees get tested, and we will provide documentation of the negative or positive test to their employer. So most of these factories have a lot of males that are working within them, and that's what I want to thank gentleman Joseph Davis, who reminded me of that if the testing is probably up because of the males that are working in the factory.
Also, I'm sure, I see that you are a member of Kappa Alpha Psi.
Yes.
I'm sure you're reaching out to the fraternities and some of the churches that have males there. But I wanted to ask you this too. What about, a lot of people ask me, well, why do I have to have an insurance card there?
And that's the beauty of an FQHC. We have a legislation that says we cannot turn anyone away with even if they don't have an ability to pay. So what we have is a sliding fee scale. But one thing that the federal government is doing is simply this. They are actually giving us funding for the test to be done. That's how important this is in the community. So I would say to people, I have labeled our test free COVID testing. Let us be concerned about the payment arrangement. We just want people to come out and get tested. And this is pervasive across all FQHCs. The test can be free. We do look at Medicaid and Medicaid cards or ability to pay so that we can report those numbers within our data, but no one is turned away from a test.
Well, Dr. Coleman, we know you're doing great work, good work, important work in the community. And I love what you said about people not just thinking about themselves, but their family and taking
That's the important thing. We have to take care of our families. We have to take care of our communities. And last but not least, I want to again encourage people, wear your mask.
Oh, I knew he was going to do it, Carolyn. I
It's
shouldn't-
red and white, right?
Of course.
This is why I love him. This is why I love him. Well, you stay safe. You've got a grandbaby that I'm trying to get my hands on. So you stay safe
Shout out to Naomi, who's watching from California.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Dr. Coleman, for all that you do. We
I
appreciate it.
appreciate the work you all are doing, and anything we can do to help, please let us know.
Thank you. Thank you
Thank
very
you,
much.
Dr. Coleman.
I tell you what, the fraternities, they can lead this whole movement, right? Everybody's
Oh,
connected some kind of way.
absolutely. You know, we talk about masks a lot. We talk about the protection, and especially with the protesters right now, we want to make sure
We're
that
going to talk about it when we come back, right? After the break?
yes, we are.
Let's get
We
that.
are.
Okay.
To help protect others from COVID-19, DHEC encourages everyone to wear a mask or cloth face covering when in public. Make sure your mask covers your nose and mouth, and you can breathe through it. Remember to clean your hands before and after putting on your mask, and try not to touch the mask or your face while wearing it. Don't use a mask on children under the age of 2, and don't use surgical masks needed by healthcare workers. Help stop the spread. Visit scdhec.gov/COVID-19.
Yes, again, a special thanks to our friends over at the South Carolina Department of Health and Environmental Control. Especially shout out to Michelle Harris, who was helping us in shepherding this through and being able to get those important critical message. It was great to see the coach too. She's
Yes.
kids would say killing it down here. This basketball is amazing, off the chain at South Carolina, University of South Carolina. Yeah,
I love it. I love it. And as I was saying that, you know, we talk about masks all the time, and I knew we were going to run that. And then we have something else we want to show you. Remember, Dr. Hildreth kept talking to us about being a vector, and that means being a carrier, and how easily it is to spread COVID-19. So let's take a look at what Dr. Hildreth, the president of Meharry Medical College and also the CEO and 40 years in infectious disease, has to say about why we need to wear these masks and being a vector.
absolutely.
Reproductive numbers. COVID has a value of about 4, which means that for every person who's infected, on average, up to 4 people might become infected by the person who's transmitting the virus. That means that the number of people infected could possibly double every 6 days. And if you do the math, that would mean that a single person, after 60 days, could be responsible for 1 million infections.
One person.
One person.
Gotta say,
I know you mentioned, and I don't know if this was the same football team. I was looking at an article just this morning about Alabama, and several of their players, they've gone into practicing, and several of them have now contracted COVID-19.
the player I was thinking about, and I want to say Michigan, but I could be off. But the player said that he had actually participated in a protest. And that's actually what's really got the mask conversation stirring this week in particular. You've got protesters that are out there. They're very close. In some instances, I see some masks people are wearing. In other instances, I don't. We happen to have photographs of the ones that do. But if you are planning to, and I keep hearing friends saying that their kids are going out or they're deciding to go out and walk with the young people, please make sure you put the mask on, because not only is there the general concern of COVID-19 because we're in this pandemic, the other piece is there was a New York Times article in the paper this week that talked about people actually looking at possible effects of tear gas. And early on, you might remember we had Dr. Yarbrough, one of our doctors on call from Washington, D.C. He's in the ER and he was seeing a lot of COVID patients. So we checked in with him and we asked him, were they starting to see some of this? He did confirm there is some serious discussion and chatter about the fact that there could be an effect between the tear gas and the lungs in particular. So again, if you're going to go out anyway, you should have the mask on. If you're going to protest, for sure, you should have the mask on. And stay tuned and pay close attention to those stories.
And especially if you have a respiratory issue or asthma or any other type of lung issue, definitely pay close attention to those.
Well, I understand the poll we asked at the top of the show. We've had some people responding to the poll. And I know a lot of times you joke about we could be on the air and people texting you as opposed to texting.
Well, yeah, let me look at my phone because I know I've
Carla's
gotten.
phone. Check your phone, but we need to come off of Carla's phone and come into the show. Let's see those poll results. What can you show us, Hillary, as we get into the poll results? I see Nashonda registered with our poll, and answer was A as in yes, absolutely. Nashonda, we again appreciate you joining us last week and being with us. We've got Angela moving forward. She gave us an A as well. Again, another yes. I think people are recognizing this for what it is. And Carletta Reed Winfrey's A as well, and recognizing that it is, it's the connection. And that's really what we've been talking about all along when we talk about these health disparities. If the stress of racism is weakening that immune system, then you cannot be equipped to fight this pandemic. And people, the conversation is continuing, and they're saying it more than ever that we should expect that this will be back in the fall. And so if it's going to come back in the fall, we want to be ready. We want to be healthy.
Well, and one of the reasons why, because some people think like, oh, it's dying down, but now you can see it creeping up and starting again slowly. A lot of things are going to happen in the fall. Some schools will have schools in a building. Some schools have elected not to. Some schools will have sports, is what we're seeing. Some schools will have band. Some people will be going back to work in four walls. And some companies have just said, you know what, especially with technology, we're not going to have you come to work at all anymore. But even with that, you still have to practice social distancing and have your mask, or it is just going to come back with a vengeance in the fall.
South Carolina was reporting this week that the numbers were up. And part of the reason you'll hear a lot from some of our guests that are in the southeastern region of the country. This is a national show, but the southeastern region is where they have the health disparities belt. And literally, I believe my Congressman Clyburn has often said, you could take out a belt and run it across the southeastern portion of the United States, and all those states that you're capturing, North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Mississippi, which is why we had our friend Dr. Coleman on.
New Orleans.
About New Orleans.
Louisiana.
Absolutely. It's inside of that Bible Belt. And again, we're mobile people. If you're going home for a family visit, a funeral, you remember in Albany where they actually traced the funeral of, I believe, 2 people and traced it to a number of cases that were there in the city of Albany. So you think, oh, those are the people down south. There's no connection. There is a lot of connection. There's a lot of connection in this country between us and each other. And so we've got to all stay healthy.
And Southerners tend to go to church by census results more than other parts of the country. Not that you don't, but Southerners, tend to go. There's a lot of conversation in the religious community about what we're going to do. Most people that I know, pastors and people who are in leadership positions, are saying we're not going for sure in June and maybe not in July. So people are talking. And that's good that they're talking. They're actually listening to science instead of dates now. So that's good.
Absolutely. It's excellent. Well, as we've said, we are focused on facts calming fears so that people have information that is science-based, medical-based. We stay away from politics. You might hear me occasionally mention my congressman. He's one of the individuals that has been shepherding the discussion about health disparities for probably 2 decades now. So he's not new to this effort to try to get people to recognize and to eradicate health disparities. And that's what we're trying to do with this broadcast. I do have to make one other mention before we head out of here today. When you asked me what my favorite shot was this week, it was our friend Mayor Muriel Belzer in Washington, D.C., who in fact echoed what so many of us have been feeling and saying all along, and that is Black Lives Matter. And she did that by painting the streets and forming the Black Lives Matter Plaza, which is on 16th Street in Washington, D.C. I've heard people already saying they're getting ready to plan their trips to go to Washington to check it out. But kudos to Muriel for saying what a lot of us were thinking.
Absolutely. And I was telling you earlier when we were chatting that I had a friend that says, well, I don't know why you guys keep saying Black Lives Matter, because all lives matter. And I said, you are absolutely correct. All lives matter, but you're not recognizing Black lives. You're not seeing what's happening to Black lives. And I asked her, name me 10 Caucasian gentlemen that you have known to be killed by the police. that you can just rattle off? Because I can name all 40. She said, I'm listening. I understand.
Listening is key. Listening is key. Well, listen, we're out of time. It's 12:30 on Mike Live. We want to thank everybody for being with us for this edition of the Health Wrap. We hope you join us again next week. We more importantly hope that you share this with your family and friends, your colleagues, your coworkers, your fraternities. Yes, we have a couple on. We need the other 2 represented or 3.
Carolyn, we know you're an Alpha Sorority Incorporated lady.
So we need others on, but we look forward to you all joining us again on Saturday. Again, spread the word. Let's let this spread and become viral.
Absolutely. Stay safe and stay alive.
Take care. Bye.